साहब जो हैं ये लम्स के अंदर भी रहे, वाइस चांसलर थे, इनके लास्ट अपॉइंटमेंट पाइड इस्लामाबाद में. तो he has been doing very interesting thing in Turkey, in United States, in Pakistan, and many other places.
ठीक है. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So I'm going to talk about the Dr. Shahid Qureshi से बात हुई थी. He said that the class was interested in learning about me, so I'll start with that. Um, actually, there's a lot of biographical material on my personal website. There's the About Me page, which has, I think, links to most of the things. There's a brief autobiography written up in this link. There's an interview on Sky's the Limit, which is on the About Me page. And then there's a personal talk to MIT friends about my years at MIT, which is entitled Lessons That MIT Did Not Teach Me. So that's something that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. Um, so I'm not going to talk very much about my personal life because there is all that material available. I'm going to talk about how I came to think in the way that I currently do, which is actually reflected in the previous talk that you were seeing about the doctor. क्या नाम था उनका? Pat. I haven't seen this before, but it was a
Adam Patch, Dr. Adam
Patch,
Patch.
Dr. Patch. That was a wonderful talk for two reasons. First of all, um, what he is doing is really what makes sense to all of us in our hearts. And this is how the world should be. Magar he is an eccentric, an unknown, yani hundreds of thousands, millions of people are doing exactly the opposite of what he is teaching. So how did it come to be that things which are normal, sensible, human become so marginalized that it's very difficult to accept them into any kind of mainstream thinking. So that is the issue that we would like to address. So I'm going to start now. I have come to this position where all of what conventional thought is appears to be deadly wrong, not just a little bit wrong, not just in need of correction. It's just in need of being vomited out like a poison that you have swallowed in order to be able to start living. So, and this is what roughly there has been a huge change in ways of thinking. So I started out with a normal Pakistani family, normal meaning that sometimes we would pray and sometimes we would not. Religion was not a big deal for us. It was part of the background, but it was just something that everybody did, and we also did. We didn't think very much about what Islam means. So, I was very young when I left for MIT. I was 16 years old, and my father was heavily impressed by the U.S. educational system, so he targeted us to go to the USA. And so I went for MIT. I got my degree in math. Then I went to Stanford for a PhD in economics. And the thing that I learned much later, I realized much later, that in addition to being taught mathematics and physics and chemistry and biology and economics and philosophy, I was also being taught how I should live. And that is part of the meta training, the training that was not given explicitly in terms of being part of our courses, but it was being taught to us by the model of knowledge that was presented to us and by the model of the lifestyles that were presented to us and by the movies and by the all the other media that impacted on us, that we were being taught how to live. This is something that I did not realize at that time. So the way of living that was taught to me during these years was extremely bad in the sense that I became basically the way of to be more explicit. I was taught that life is all about hedonism, yani maximization of pleasure. So I said, okay, let's see how can I maximize pleasure. So I tried to do it, and it is about selfishness, that you should worry only about yourself and your own pleasure and not worry about others. So ultimately, this led me to become um, very lonely and very miserable, because it turns out, as I didn't realize at the time, but I learned much later, that happiness is really all about social relationships, being able to love other people and being loved by others. So this is what makes people happy. It is not a maximization of money. It's not acquisition of goods and services. And exactly that's what Patch was saying, that people leave $1 million jobs to come to work for him for $300, because serving humanity is really what we were built for. This is what our Creator designed us for. And this is what gives us the maximum amount of pleasure. So, by following the lifestyle that I was taught at MIT and Stanford, I really became extremely unhappy to the point that I realized that this is not working. And so I started looking for alternatives. But by that time, I had distanced myself from my original culture and my religion and everything. So I was searching from a neutral background, that, okay, what is a philosophy of life that I should adopt? And I looked through not only the religions of the world, like Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism. Actually, Buddhism and Zen Buddhism particularly appealed to me a lot. Uh, Also, I looked through philosophies. There are many alternative lifestyle philosophies. I was actually in California at the time, Stanford, and California is very famous for alternative lifestyles. And there were lots of things. I went to an encounter group and other such exploratory. Uh, but while that was much better than my any exploration, gave me some relief. It didn't give me a solution. And it wasn't until 1980 that I spent my first 40 days in Tabligh, and then I came to the realization. And it's a long story, so and it's not directly my objective in this talk. So then I came to the realization there's something, that Islam is very meaningful, and it has answers to questions that I had been looking for and been unable to find. So after 1991, so after that, I spent 40 days every year until 1991, where I got the chance to actually put in the 4 months, which is the basic requirement for graduation from Tabligh. And that was really something that was a life-changing experience. And I learned that all of the education at MIT, the 3 years and 3 years at Stanford, they had taught me nothing of value compared to what I learned in the 4 months. But now the question is, what was it that I learned? And that is something that there's something that you learn, but then to be able to articulate it, to explain what it is, that is a different job, because the training is really training of the heart and the spirit. And it cannot be expressed in words, and it cannot be understood so easily by aql or reason. But I did learn how to do that over decades of work and thought. So, so basically, what we are engaged in, what our life is all about, yours and mine, is that this is a battleground of ideas. There are many ideas floating around, and we adopt some of them. We think that these are good ideas, and we reject some of them. We think that those are bad ideas. But now the question, see, thinking begins when you start thinking about thinking. So meta thinking, that's really, to be an intellectual, you have to learn how to think about ideas. And to do that, you have to distance yourself. You have to take your personal attachments out. And you have to say that, okay, here is an idea. Some people love this idea passionately and they are willing to die for it. And here is the opposite idea. And some people love this opposite idea passionately and they are willing to die for it. So now, how should I think about these two ideas without being personally involved in the battle? So this is the detachment that you need in order to be able to make intellectual progress, to understand life, and to learn to live, learn to be a human beings. So this is what one of the main messages that I would like to convey, that you have to rise above attachment, because our first instinct when you are presented an idea that here is this idea X, you say, oh, I like it or I don't like it. And if you like it, then you think about it and you adopt it. And if you don't like it, you reject it. So we have to rise above that, and we say we have to look at the idea on itself without letting our personal attachment or dislike influence our study of the idea. All right, so that's the meta thought. Now let me get back to the ground level. So there is something that happened 1450 years ago. The message of Islam came to the ignorant and backwards Bedouin, and it led them to world leadership. This is a historical event not denied by anybody. So the question is, how did this happen? What was there in that message that caused such a huge revolution on the scale of world history? Historians have testified that if you want to look at a single event that was maximally influential in all of world history, it was this event. This message coming to ignorant and backwards Bedouin transformed them into the leaders of the world and created a world civilization which was dominant for 1,000 years and has influenced all types of thought. So the question is important for us, not so much the historical experience as, is this message still relevant and still important? Does it still have the same power today? Okay, so this is just a question. I won't give an answer right now. Another question which is very important, and actually the question that is more important from our current point of view and training, is that from the 16th century onwards, if we look at the world up to the 16th century, standards of living are not that different all over the world. But after the 16th century, the West started a slow progress. And eventually, in the early 20th century, they became globally dominant. They had conquered about 90% of the world. So what happened in those 3 centuries? What happened after the Middle Ages ended? The Dark Ages of Europe ended and they started their Enlightenment. And so how did that happen? And is that something that we can replicate? Can we also do this? That currently it does seem like we are living in Dark Ages and we need to make drastic progress. So how should we do that? Can we copy their methods? So when I was trained in MIT and Stanford, this was not a question. This was taken as a definite statement of fact that we are very much backwards compared to Europe and the USA and the Western civilization in general. And the only way to progress is to learn European ideas and European knowledge and understand and absorb European values, and that there is no other alternative. So it was only much later when I went into Tabligh that I started to question this. Is this really true that there is no alternative but to acquire Western values and Western knowledge? And is it really true that the path to salvation lies in learning physics, chemistry, and biology, and all that is being taught in the universities all over the world? This is what knowledge is, and this is what will bring us the change that we are looking for, the transformation. that became a question in my mind after I put in my 4 months in Tabligh. Before that, it was not a question. So uh, after Tabligh, I came to this ayat in the Quran which says, Allahu waliyul lazina amanu, yukhrijuhum min al-dhulumati ila an-nur, wal-lazina kafaru awliya'uhum at-taghut, yukhrijunahum min an-nur ila al-dhulumat, ulaika ashabun nar hum fi khalidun. So this ayat says that Allah is the friend of those who believe and He takes them from darkness to light. And as for those who don't believe, their friends are the shayateen and they take them from light to darkness. So this is what the Quran is saying. But when I open my eyes and look around me, I see that exactly the opposite seems to be the truth. It is the people who don't believe who are living in light and they have energy, and the people in Karachi are living with energy shortages and they are in darkness. So there is a huge conflict between what the Quran is saying and what my eyes are showing me. And so this was a big problem for me, because after Tabligh, after my experience, I learned that faith involves trusting in the unseen, believing in the unseen, what you cannot see. So I had learned from Tabligh the idea that your eyes are showing you is often a deception. And this I learned from experience, and that the heart shows you the truth. So here I was torn between two exactly opposite ideas. On the one hand, the faith, the eyes of faith, the eyes of the heart tell me that the Quran is true and pure guidance, the last message of Allah to mankind, and it must be true, and it must lead me to light. And on the other hand, my training and education at MIT and Stanford says that the light lies in mathematics and calculus and physics and chemistry and quantum mechanics and medical science, and the whole world is pursuing this path. So there's just no way to reconcile these two messages. So I so I started asking Allah Ta'ala for guidance on this matter, because I was just completely torn. I couldn't understand how this could work. So the question that came to my mind was that, what is the knowledge that was given? I mean, there is a historical fact. The Quran does provide some knowledge, but I don't know what that is. But I know that the knowledge transformed the world. It caused a revolution in the world. And if you remember, the opening verses of the Quran, they talk only about knowledge. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. These are the opening verses of the Wahi. Allah Ta'ala taught mankind that which they did not know. So it's all about knowledge. It's about taught by the pen. So it's emphasizing the written transmission of knowledge, because that's the most reliable method of transmission. But it also says that the writing is not enough. You need to, we send a messenger and he taught them hikmah, wisdom, and he gave them the book. So the book and the messenger, the message and the messenger, both are important in the process of teaching. So Allah Ta'ala says in these opening verses that I'm going to give humanity a kind of knowledge which they do not have. And this knowledge, we see the effects of this knowledge, that it revolutionized the world. So the question is, what was the nature of this knowledge, and does this knowledge have the same power today? That is, and Allah Ta'ala says that we have shown him the two highways, Hadainahun Najdain, of good and evil. And he mentions the Qawm of Ad, and they were proud and they said that, who is stronger than us? So today, the West is exactly in the place of the Qawm of Ad. They reject God and they are proud and arrogant. They say, who is superior to us? There is nobody who can be superior to us. And that is what it seems like. We have accepted the sayings of the Qawm of Ad, that yes, they are superior to us and they have more knowledge and They can do things which we cannot even dream about, like they can they have miraculous advances in medicine, and they can send people to the moon and even to the Mars, and they can do just all sorts of technological miracles which we are just so far behind that we cannot even imagine, analyzing viruses and figuring out the antivirus. So this is not within our realm of capabilities. So the only way that we can progress is to catch up to these skills and learn them and acquire them and put them into practice in our lives. So that is the Western training, the MIT and Stanford talking. But Tabligh says something entirely different. It says that the message of the Quran is enough for us, but the Quran doesn't have anything about physics or chemistry or quantum mechanics or building rocket ships, etc. So, and yet the Quran says that this message is complete and sufficient for the guidance of mankind until the last day. So it certainly doesn't seem sufficient if we need to learn quantum mechanics. So there's another contradiction. There were a huge number of contradictions. So I'm going to go back and give the meta history. I was learning mathematics and calculus, but actually what I was learning in the background was more than that. It was the history of the rise of the West. How did this happen? So this is not explicitly, well, sometimes it's even explicit in the textbooks that we read, but the official narrative of the West is that the sun of reason first rose in the West in the 16th century. Note the obvious conflict with Islam. And that for the first time, mankind learned how to think. Before this, human beings had just been living according to tradition and superstition without any real thinking ability. And so that ended the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages of the West. And when they learned how to think, then they made tremendous progress for the first time again in the human history. And there was the Industrial Revolution, and Newton created science, and Copernicus created the sun-centered system. And the whole process of this progress is called the Enlightenment, the replacement of darkness of Middle Ages by the light of reason. And good governance came into being, democracy, and nearly all of the good things that we know today come from the West, and they originated in those 3 centuries of progress of the West, from the 16th to the 20th century. So this is the official history that we have all absorbed and understood, and this is all the official history that I have also absorbed and understood. But it is very much strongly in conflict with the Islamic history, which says that exactly all of these things happened 14 centuries ago when the last message of God came to mankind. So these two stories that all of us carry, all Muslims carry in their minds, are at war with each other. And how to resolve this is the issue that faces us. So one thing that took place in this process of the rise of the West was the colonization of the globe. In the early 20th century, Europe had conquered about 90% of the globe. And then again, there's the official story of how this happened and why this happened. And the official story says that this was due to the white man's burden, that the Europeans realized that they are so far ahead of all of the rest of us that they need to share their progress and their civilization with all of the rest of the world. So they left their comfortable homes and their advanced civilization, and they went into the jungles of Africa with the purpose of serving humanity by sharing their knowledge and their technology and their civilization. They came to India not to make profits and not for the sake of power, but to share their knowledge and technology and civilization, just like they went to Iraq to share their advanced civilization more recently. So there's a very important book, one of the most important books of the 20th century by Edward Said called Orientalism. And it explains that the global conquest has shaped the minds of the West and led to a superiority complex in them, corresponding inferiority complex in us. And all of the social sciences that have been developed in the West, their history, their political theory, their social theory, is actually designed to justify the massive violence and ruthless cruelty that occurred during the process of this colonization. So this is a rather different, this is what we might call a counter narrative. And also this history, the real history of how colonization took place, has been suppressed and concealed. So now we, after expressing the official narrative, which we have all absorbed and swallowed to some extent or the other, I will now talk about the counter narrative. These are the things that I learned over the course of 10 years or 20 years. It has been a long journey, and I'm sort of condensing and sort of summarizing in a very short space things that took me a very, very long time to understand and to discover and to read. So it's not going to be easy. I'm just going to give you some clues, and to actually absorb and understand these ideas will take maybe years, and it will require a lot of work. But I'm just giving you a chart of the journey that I made. So the counter narrative starts by studying Europe, what really happened in Europe, as opposed to the official narrative of what happened. It was not that there was a huge rise in thinking abilities in the West. Rather, the story starts with loss of faith. How did Europeans lose their faith in God? Again, there's a huge story, but basically it was, and then this loss of faith led to trauma, and it led to the denial of the heart and soul as the source of knowledge, that we will not be emotional, and we will deny the existence of our soul. And these are very important sources of knowledge in Islamic tradition. So that's one of the reasons why Islamic knowledge became unimportant from the European perspective. When they rejected their religion, then they had to invent a new religion, and this new religion was science. And one of the things that came about as a result of this promotion of science to a religion was the Newtonian worldview, that everything is material. Materialism has two different meanings. One is materialism as a philosophy of life, that being greedy and looking for money and things as a source of pleasure and happiness. But there is a deeper meaning of materialism, which is that materials is all there is. There are molecules, and there are atoms, and there are velocities, and basically everything that exists is all that is there. So the unseen does not exist. This is the deeper meaning, and this is actually the worldview that is part of what we are being taught. Once you deny the existence of soul and heart and mind, then human beings become programmable robots. And this is the viewpoint of behavioral psychology, that you can take a human being and you can use stimulus and response to condition him and shape him into whatever you want. And in particular, this means that since we are all robots, that there is no meaning to life. The idea that life has a higher meaning, a purpose, visions, ideals, these are all meaningless words. So in fact, the title of the book by B.F. Skinner, the founder of behavioral psychology, is Beyond Freedom and Dignity. So this idea of freedom, that we are free, and the idea of dignity, that life has a higher meaning and that we can rise above the material circumstances, these are all illusions. So actually, one must understand that history is the conquest song of the victors. So since the Europeans won the wars and they succeeded, so they wrote the story from from their own perspective. And so the true history of the conquest has been concealed. And how this happened, how Europe rose, well, I'm just going to give a very brief sketch, and this issue has to be studied carefully in order to heal the wounds that have been inflicted upon us by this colonization, which was very brutal and ruthless, and it destroyed our culture and society, and it killed the mechanisms which we used to conduct ourselves. So, in fact, Iqbal has painted this tragedy, and he has said that why nakami matae karwan jata raha, karwan ke dil se ehsaas-e ziyan jata raha. Not only was it that we have lost all the treasures of our heritage, but we have even forgotten what these treasures were. So the memory has been erased from our minds. So we don't even know what it is that we lost. So the true history starts with the corruption of the popes in the 16th century, which is documented in a book by Barbara Tuchman called March of Folly. And this led to the creation of the Protestants who protested against the Catholic excesses. And then there was huge wars in Europe between the Protestants and Catholics, which had amazing amounts of inhuman cruelty, people, treachery and barbarism. And for those who have watched this recent extremely popular television serial, what was it, with this dragons and I'm forgetting the name, but I'm sure you all know it. Because...
Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones, yes. Game of Thrones, exactly. The Game of Thrones, I mean, I'm sure those who have watched it, it's tremendously, I mean, this is actually a painting of the European history, how cruel and ruthless they were and how they really enjoyed killing each other. And that's why it's so shocking, because actually it's more or less a correct representation of European history. And so because of this, and because people were driven by their different religions into fighting each other, there was public disenchantment with the religion, and there was a loss of morality, and there was the rise of Machiavelli. Machiavellian thinking says that, politics is all about power, and you have to do whatever it takes. All of these ideas that you should be courteous, and you should have good conduct, and you should not lie, you should be honest. All of these are nonsense. And you just do what it takes for. So the process of colonization basically destroyed all of the living cultures in the world and recreated them in the image of Europe. And what was even worse, they said that this is what is best for us, that our old culture was very bad and we were just ignorant barbarians. And so today the public believes, we have been trained to believe that, we were living in trees and we didn't have any civilization before the West came and civilized us. This is the common belief, that education process started after the West came. In fact, the opposite is true, but this is not the time for me to go into that. So one of the key messages of Machiavelli is that rule should be by fear, and we are seeing a direct application of Machiavelli explicit. I mean, this is what the political theorists study, and this is what they use to govern the USA today. The public is held in terror of Islam, and this is part of the way that you rule the public, by fear and deception. This is what allows, you see, when the USA when the Russia was destroyed, US was the undominated leader of the world. They had so much power and so much military might and so much wealth that there was no second. They were 10 times larger than the nearest comparable and potential enemy. So at that time, there was a movement. There was a movement in Congress that, okay, now we no longer need to go to war. And so let us dismantle the army and let us use these funds to feed our hungry people and to take care of our social welfare. So this was a major problem for the Pentagon and the corporations who rule the USA, who have come to rule the USA. And so they manufactured enemies. The idea of the war of civilization was invented. And it was told that, we are locked in a deadly struggle with the civilization of Islam, because Islam was sufficiently big and amorphous and vague that they knew that they would never defeat it completely. So this war could continue, unlike any other country. They could not declare war on any other country because there was no worthy opponent left. So we were chosen. So the public was deceived into thinking that Islam is a deadly enemy. And the facts of the matter are that Islamic terrorism is a very small percentage of all terrorism. In the USA, 300 mass shootings take place about every year, and about 1 or 2 of them are Islamic. But the public thinks that all terrorism all over the world is caused by Islamic, because the media project an image which has nothing to do with reality. And this is how our minds have been conditioned also. So if you want to think about it in terms of history, you have to think about the invasion of Iraq and think about the fact that it was portrayed as beneficial for mankind. They were bringing civilization to Iraq, and they were getting rid of a dictator, and they were going to bring democracy. But what really happened was rather different. So basically, the image of what the colonization was about in terms of the white man's burden was very different from what actually took place, which was looting and rape of the world to bring their treasures to Europe. So these are the ground realities. But what is more important is the soft power, that the colonization is not just a conquest of the country by physical force, but it is a conquest of knowledge, of minds. The colonization of our minds is the most important problem that we face today. And to become free, we have to decolonize our minds. And the first step is to understand the definition of knowledge. So there are 2 kinds of knowledge. There is knowledge of the external world, the world outside us, and there is internal knowledge, the knowledge of the world inside me. And obviously, from our personal perspective, the most important questions for us to learn the answer to is, who am I? What are the capabilities that are inside my heart? What can I become what is the best way that I should live this precious life, which I only have one shot at? Now, we should learn about the external world only to the extent that it helps us solve these problems. So when I walk into a classroom, I should ask, how will this class help me achieve my life goals? But neither our teacher nor the textbooks, nothing that we read, tell us anything about these questions. So there is a mystery. The West only teaches us external knowledge. It doesn't teach us anything about the world inside us. No teacher and no class we go into says, let me ask you who you are, what you can be. Let me help you become the best person that you can. In fact, there is a Harvard lecture on morality, the first, And the teacher explicitly says that, you know, you are coming into this class, you're thinking this will teach you how to become a better person. But in fact, this is not what this class is going to do. In fact, it might make you a worse person. So the Western knowledge is not designed to teach us how to become a good person and what to do with our lives. And there's a reason for that. In Europe, when they rejected external reality, when they rejected their religion, then they also rejected the heart and soul, because they said, you know, the heart and soul, they deceived us. They deceived us into thinking that Christianity was true, when in fact it was not. So from now on, we will not trust the testimony of the heart, and we will only use our aql, our reason. And so once they put heart and soul out of the realm of knowledge, then they started to lose their knowledge of what it means to be a human being. And this was the price they paid for learning about the atoms and the electrons and the stars and the mountains and the rivers and the animals. So they had increasing knowledge of external reality, but decreasing knowledge of the heart and the soul. And what was much worse was, this actually happened in early 20th century, that the social sciences were constructed on the basis that they were to be like physics previously. And so now this is an interpretation of this ayat, that they were led from light to darkness in the realm of understanding human beings. And that is the most important kind of knowledge. They started looking for universal laws, just like you see physics. So for the purpose of physics, you have to reduce every human being to a robot, because that's how you can study. If I say that I am unique, if I say that you, my student, you are unique, there has never been anyone like you in the world. And this is absolutely true. No, even if you have two twins, they have different life experiences. Every single of the 7 billion human beings, every human being has a different life experience. Everyone is completely unique. No one like him before, no one like him afterwards. So, but science cannot be applied to these unique people, because science is all about replication and experiments and universal laws. So basically, the knowledge of the West eliminated individuality and personality, and it created a picture of human beings which was universal. It says that since there is no afterlife, rationality or reason requires that we should only look for pleasure in this life, and we should only look for luxury and power and all of the good things of this world. And since only I matter, because caring for others is stupid, because there's no afterlife. There's no one who's looking to see if we act good or bad. Basically, the roots of Machiavelli. There is no rational basis for morality. So all of this is the background that I have covered very, very briefly. And now I am going to go towards an action plan. What should we do in the light of this understanding? So the very first step that we need to take is to remove the inferiority complex that we have acquired from 3 centuries of colonization. This was actually deliberately inflicted upon us. We were trained to be and feel inferior. This was part of the purpose of Western education, which it continues to be. I remember my daughter was studying at Beacon House, and she came home one day and she said that our teachers told us today that, in the Europe, streets are clean, our streets are dirty. They think rationally and logically. We are stupid and superstitious. So she repeated the white man's burden propaganda, which has been implanted into our minds and continues today. So how can we remove this inferiority complex that is natural part of the process that was 3 centuries of of colonization will create an inferiority complex. So we have to learn the true history of colonization. We have to learn the value of character, and we have to learn the forgotten treasures of our own history. Iqbal has expressed this in his verse that khira na kar saka mujhe jalwa danish farang surma hai meri aankh ka khake madina wa najaf. So he escaped being super impressed by Western knowledge because his eyes were protected. But unfortunately, most of the Ummah did not escape this enchantment of the West. So we have to go back to ancient wisdom. To know thyself is the beginning of wisdom. A life unexamined is not worth living. In the Islamic tradition, he man arafa nafsuhu arafa rabbuhu. So this is a statement often cited as hadith, but actually it's a saying from our Sufi saint Ibn Arabi. And so this is the beginning of wisdom. So if you don't know yourself, then you haven't started the journey towards knowledge. And this is exactly the defect in the knowledge that I learned at MIT and at Stanford. For 6 years, I learned about how to do math and how to build models and theories, but I didn't learn a single iota about who I am, what I can become, what are my feelings, how can I control them. And even in the West, as there are people who are beginning to understand these things, just like this doctor whose lecture was being shown earlier, that actually life is not about the aql, it is about the emotions. It's the heart and soul which govern our lives. And I didn't learn even any one jot, one tittle of knowledge about them. And this is what the knowledge that I came to learn from my time spent in Tabligh and from the teachings of Islam. And as I made better progress, I acquired greater knowledge about these concepts which are simply missing from Western intellectual tradition today, although they did have this in the past. So there's a puzzle that I should pose to you, that education teaches about how we should live. It should teach us the purpose of life. That's the first question that any student should ask. That that's the first question that I and my classmates asked when we entered MIT. That look, we are here. We want to learn how to live, what we should spend our time on. But there was no mention of it. And there is an implicit answer that there is no meaning to life. So do whatever you like. And so the answer is just eat, drink, and be merry. But there is a deeper reason for this, that education is meant to create functioning parts for capitalist machinery, which is running the world today. So all of you we are going to polish your individual quirks, any aspects of personality, any unique aspects that you have. They are not helpful for the capitalist machinery. You have to be turned into cogs which fit together in order to run the capitalist machinery. And so we cannot afford to tell you about what are your unique features and what are the things that only you can do and nobody else can. These are all capabilities that we want to remove from you. We want you to think of yourself as a robot, so that you will sell yourself for a little bit of money that we will offer you in the capitalist factories. So we started by asking, what was the secret of Islamic teachings that launched a revolution in the world? And this is the secret, that every human being is infinitely precious. The Quran says that if you take one human life, it's like you have killed all of humanity. And if you save one human life, it's like you have saved all of humanity. So every human being, every person, me and you, all students sitting in this class, you're all like seeds. All of these seeds have the potential to grow into a tree. So if you develop your hidden capabilities, then you will realize this potential.
to do this, you have to learn that you're not for sale at any price. And actually, capitalism teaches you exactly the opposite lesson. Every one of you has been trained to believe that the success lies in the ability to sell yourself. And after you graduate, you will go into the job market and you will be put up for sale, and there will be bidders. And the successful person is he who can sell himself to a multinational and get a salary in dollars. And the higher the salary that you have, that is your price. So this is what you have been trained into believing. So the message that no, you're an object who is not for sale at any price, that's directly in conflict with the message that you have been taught and trained to believe. And if you learn to believe, like this Dr. Patch, that money doesn't matter, then you will be of no use to the capitalist machinery. Just imagine if there were more people like this Dr. Patch, that they didn't want to work for money. Do you think that the current system could run? How these hospitals in the USA, they are money-making machines. My daughter and my son-in-law both are doctors, and they have said, they have told me that, we are trained, it is not the medical skills which we are evaluated on, it's our ability to make money for the hospital that matters. And there are so many examples of this. So if there were people like Dr. Patch, then this system couldn't function, because the goal of a hospital is not to cure people, it is to make money. So I'm going to sort of come to the end of this lecture and just give you some pointers on, because I have given a whole lecture on how we can learn to be we can learn to rise above the environment, and that's in the ways of the eagles. And this is another interpretation of Iqbal. वो फरेब खुर्द शाहीन जो पला हो करगसों में उसे क्या खबर कि क्या है रहो रस्म शाहबाजी. So he compares the children of the Ummah to Shaheen, eagle which is meant to fly high in the heavens, but they have been trained to be crows. So now what are the characteristic of the crows? That they eat dead meat and they are low flying. And so basically you have been trained, and dead meat here means material. You have been trained that your goal is to work for money. Money is the reference of this dead meat, actually. That this material things, these are not the things that you were, this is not in your soul. This is not your heritage. Your heritage is to rise high above, to soar like the eagles, to be unconcerned by these worldly things, not to live in castles, but to live in high mountains, and to be with the clouds. But you have been trained to live low and to think low and to be low and to sell yourself for money. And that's why you have lost your heritage, because you have been deceived into believing that you are a crow when in fact you are a Shaheen. So to be more specific, in order to overcome our the deception that we have been trained to believe in, we have been trained to think of ourselves as cheap, as objects for sale in the market. So we have to rise above this. In order to do this, we have to engage our heart and soul, and these are missing from the Western education. So one of the key messages is learn who you are, learn what your identity is. This is not part of your training, but this is the most important question that all of us face in our lives. And there is a lecture of mine about that. And then we have to overcome the colonization of minds. We have to learn how history has shaped our thoughts. And there is a lecture about that. Again, all of these are links to the larger lecture. How can we overcome the inferiority complex that has been imposed upon us? There is a lecture on that. All of these are like 1 hour lectures. And how can we learn to aim high to reach for the stars and even reach beyond the stars. And that is another lecture. So these are some of the things that we must learn to do.
MashaAllah.
So let me just put these are the concluding remarks. There's a huge amount of material and lessons which I have extracted from a lifetime of experience, and the details are given in these blogs. And so now I'm going to stop my lecture here and give you time to ask questions and to have some discussion.
جی ماشاءاللہ جناب جی بہت شکریہ ڈاکٹر صاحب may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you a lot, and it's once again it's pretty eye-opening and it's very interesting overview, a story from the West جناب MIT اسٹینفرڈ سے ہوتے ہوئے اللہ تعالیٰ نے اکنامکس کے پرنسپلس میں ڈاکٹر صاحب نے اللہ تعالیٰ نے موقع دیا دیکھنے کا. تو if somebody has a question, please just raise your hand. ڈاکٹر عباسی صاحب آپ بھی سوال پوچھ سکتے ہیں.
سر ایک کوئی کوشچن ہے. تھینک یو ویری مچ فار انلائٹننگ ٹاک اینڈ putting that much of effort and knowledge of so many years. ماشاءاللہ ہمارے مسیح الزمان صاحب رحمۃ اللہ علیہ ان کے والد صاحب کا بھی بہت بڑا کنٹریبیوشن ہے ان فیڈرل گورنمنٹ آف پاکستان ان دا بیوروکریسی. تو اللہ تعالیٰ ان کو بھی جنت نصیب کرے اور
ذرا آپ کے سگنلز خراب ہو گئے ہیں ڈاکٹر صاحب. اچھا جی ڈاکٹر صاحب ذرا ایک جگہ اسٹیٹک ہو جائیں.
مختصر کوشچن یہ ہے کہ سر جو ہمارا نے جو باتیں کی ہیں سر کہ ہمیں آلٹرنیٹ میڈس جو آپ کا ہے ہم زیادہ اس کو انٹرپرینور کی طرف لے کے جائیں گے یا اس میں پازیٹیو بھی ہے؟ کیونکہ اس میں دیکھیں پلان اور گول کی بہرحال مقصدیت اس کی پروسیسنگ اس کی اہمیت بھی انہوں نے اجاگر کی ہے. تو یہ ان کی بات تقریباً درمیان کی بات ہے. پھر اس کا مطلب ہے خیر الامور اوسطھا کہ یہ دونوں کو ساتھ لے کے چلنے کی کوشش کر رہے تھے یا یہ کہ ایک طرف جا رہے ہیں؟ یہ ذرا کلیئر کر دیں.
ڈاکٹر صاحب انٹرپرینورشپ کا پروفیسر نہیں ہے تو وہ ذرا آپ یہ اصل میں انٹرپرینورشپ پڑھ رہے ہیں ڈاکٹر صاحب آنکولوجی. ہی از اے پروفیسر آف آنکولوجی. تو وہ ان کا سوال آپ سے ڈاکٹر صاحب سے ریلیونٹ شاید نہ ہو. تو بہرحال وہ آئی تھنک درمیان میں ہی ہے. وہ انٹرپرینورشپ بھی چاہیے اور لانگ ٹرم پلاننگ بھی کبھی کبھی چل جاتی ہے. تو ابھی تو ہم ڈاکٹر صاحب سے متعلقہ سوال پوچھ لیتے ہیں. if anybody has a question. ڈاکٹر صاحب جو ہے سر آنکولوجی کا پروفیسر ہیں اسد زمان صاحب, اور یہ ان کو اللہ تعالیٰ نے نا یہ درد دیا ہے. انہوں نے ماشاءاللہ 4 مہینے لگائے, اس کے بعد ان کو اللہ نے درد دے دیا. ہی آئرلینڈ سے ایفرسس کیا اور وہ یہ ان کو بھی یہی درد ہے ڈاکٹر پیچ والا. ہی وانٹس ٹو بی پاکستانی پیچ. اور وہ یہ کہہ رہے ہیں کہ یار وہ اتنا مہنگا علاج آنکولوجی کا ہو رہا ہے. یہ
ونڈس ہاسپٹل بھی ہے اور پاکستان میں وہ چلڈرنز ہاسپٹل بنایا ہے انہوں نے جو کہ فری ٹریٹمنٹ کرتے ہیں. شوکت خانم میں بھی کچھ نہ کچھ ہو جاتا ہے. تو ہو رہا ہے الحمدللہ, اور اسلامک لائنز اسلامک تھنکنگ کی وجہ ہی سے ہو رہا ہے اور اسی فاؤنڈیشن پہ بلڈ کرنا ہے. اور کیونکہ ہمارے یہاں یہی چلے گا, یعنی دس از دا سالڈ گراؤنڈ ورک, اور اس کی بیسس پہ کیا جا سکتا ہے. ایکچولی ان 1000 years of our history یہ چیز اب ہم فارگاٹن ہسٹری ہو گئی ہے, مگر کبھی ایسا نہیں ہوا کہ کسی بچے کو جس کے پاس ٹیلنٹ ہو اس کو پیسے دینے ہوں ایجوکیشن کے لیے, اور اسی طرح سے علاج کے لیے بھی پیسے دینے کا کنسیپٹ نہیں تھا. یہ سوشل رسپانسبلٹی تھی سوسائٹی کی. ہم سب کی ذمہ داری ہے کہ ہمارے امت میں جتنے بچے ہیں ان کو پڑھائی لکھائی کا موقع میسر کیا جائے, اور یہ جس کے پاس علم ہے اس کی ذمہ داری ہے کہ وہ ان لوگوں تک پہنچائے. یہ کبھی ایسا نہیں ہوا ہماری امت میں 1000 سال تک کہ بچے سے کہا جائے, بچہ کہے کہ میں علم سیکھنا چاہتا ہوں, تو کہیں کہ اچھا ذرا پیسے لاؤ تو پھر میں پڑھاؤں گا. دس واز کانسیپٹ دیٹ ڈڈنٹ ایگزسٹ. مگر آج کیپٹلزم نے اس کو اتنا عام کر دیا ہے کہ اب ہم کو یہ تصور ہی نہیں ہے کہ یہ ایسا ہو بھی سکتا ہے.
جی طلحہ وان صاحب, طلحہ صاحب پلیز یو آر انوائٹڈ ٹو بی انمیوٹ یور سیلف. جی
Thank you, sir. Assalamu alaikum. Sir, my question is, you mentioned that in every class you go, you must ask how this helps in achieving your personal goals, in your life goals. So my question is twofold. One, how do you go about setting these life goals? Like, what is that journey, and or what is that premise that you follow to set up these life goals? That's one side of it. And then, as Quran mentions, and we read in the Quran, وَمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا مَتَاعُ الْغُرُورِ. This world is just a delusion. So with that in context, how do you achieve those goals, or even set out on that journey to really live a meaningful life in this earth?
Yeah,
Thank
this
you.
is a very good question. You see, when you start thinking about the true outlines of Islamic education, which have been lost, by the way, because our even our madrasas are not in the shape of the madrasas in which Imam al-Ghazali studied, because in our tradition, the education was all encompassing. It was not confined to Quran and Hadith, and it did not exclude the knowledge of worldly material. So all things were taught. Even in our own madrasas in Hindustan, they were teaching astronomy and mathematics and shipbuilding and medicine. All of these things were being taught in the educational institutions in India and Pakistan before colonization. So it was the colonization that created the split. So what I'm saying is that a genuine Islamic education is very different in nature and character. So we are not used to this. It's not really within. We haven't seen anything like this. So it's very hard for us to imagine. But basically, an Islamic education, a Western education is just brainwashing. They take the teacher has a particular amount of material in the book, and the goal is to take this material and put this into your mind. It doesn't matter who you are, because you are just a blank robot, and we are going to program you with this material. So Islamic education, when you start talking about life goals, then these simply cannot be imposed. I cannot say, here is your life purpose, follow it. That's just ridiculous. Your life purpose has to be discovered by you, because you are unique. You have unique capabilities, you have unique opportunities, you have strengths. And in fact, I think Dr. Shahid Qureshi uses this methodology in his entrepreneurship, that you look at where you are and start with your own position. So this is a different kind of teaching. Now, from one that, okay, it doesn't matter who you are, where you are, what you are, there's only this one method of success, and I'm going to teach it to you. So that's, so when you start about life goals, then you have to take every student from where he is, and you have to encourage them to explore their own thinking and their own selves and their own opportunities in ways that will cause them to grow as a person. So the goal of the teacher is not to implant some knowledge in the mind of the students. It is to create a nurturing environment in which the student can grow into whatever he is capable of being, or she is capable of being. So, so the life goals are actually defined in the Quran, but it is not that they are thrust upon you. It is that you have to learn, because a life goal cannot be thrust upon you. The Quran is an invitation. It is a reminder. And so these messages are built into the heart. And this is what Dr. Patch was saying, that the message that serving humanity out of the love of Allah, this is the most, the sweetest experience that you can have. This is built into our hearts. So now I have to remind you of this. And when you experiment with this yourself, you will learn it for yourself. And that is the only true learning, that when you experience it, then it becomes part of you. If I tell you about it, it makes little difference. But it might show you a light and a direction. And it will, and if I show you the right light, it will appeal to something that is built into your heart, because that's what it means, that Islam is Deenul Fitrat. So that's why the reminder is helpful. فَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, because it appeals to ideas which are built deeply into our hearts. So it attracts us, and it encourages us and invites us to walk along the pathways that will lead us to the truth. But nobody else can lead anybody else to the truth. But we can show some lights. And the lights are given in the Quran and the Hadith and the Sunnah and the character of the Sahaba.
MashaAllah. Wonderful, Janab. So
You're welcome.
maybe
Thank
take
you.
one more question, the last one, Taha Saab, Taha bin Mahmood, or if any of our women participants ने एक सवाल पूछना तो वो भी पूछ सकते हैं.
Sir,
जी
जी sir, my okay.
जी पूछ रहे हैं Samreen, please.
जी sir, actually I'm not able to raise my hand, so I'm
जी
questioning
कोई
it.
बात नहीं, फरमाइए.
So my question is that Pakistan, that's a country like Pakistan, we were colonized, and we're very impressed with Western ideology and institutions. So what we try to do is like let's talk about the banking system. So what we do is that we take their structures and we transform it in a way for it to become what we can say is that something it can be transformed to something which we can use in Pakistan as well, and which goes with our Islamic principles and values as well. So this is how we came up with Islamic banking. So what do you have to say about this, that we need to transform it, or we do it explicitly? We should come up with something which is explicitly Islamic and it doesn't have anything to do with the Western ideology or institutions.
Yes, this is a good meta question. It deals with a level that is higher than any one individual. And these are important questions to ask and understand and analyze. But what I have learned is that people should deal with questions at their own level. That is, we are always thinking at a level which is beyond our capabilities. There's a joke that one man says that I and my wife, we have divided the chores. I handle all of the major questions, and my wife, she takes care of all of the minor issues. So people said, "What? Please explain this." So he said, I decide about whether Trump should win or Biden should win, and whether there should be an invasion of Iran or Iraq, and whether what's happening in Somalia, and all of the international issues, the CPEC affairs, all of these things are my domain of responsibility. And my wife, she decides what will be cooked in the house, and what is the school the children will go to, and who the children will marry. All of these trivial minor issues, she decides.
जी ताहा साहब हैं जी. You want a question, ताहा साहब?
जी सर.
जी sorry जी.
अच्छा सर, basically what I wanted to ask है, जब हमारी society is like you said के build his perception to ये that we need to create masses and they sort of kill the creativity inside a child. ठीक है, क्योंकि एजुकेशन सिस्टम ही हम लोग का sort of इस तरह से डिजाइंड है. So at this level, at this stage, when after sort of being caged in for 20 years, तो how मतलब कि हम वो creativity तो खत्म हो ही गई ना, तो how could हम लोग वो बच्चों में उजागर कैसे कर सकेंगे? That is my question. क्योंकि बेसिकली इस्लाम, अगर हम लोग कुरान वगैरह भी देखें तो कुरान में भी बेसिकली एडवाइस यही किया जाता है कि कुरान को सिर्फ पढ़ा नहीं जाए, समझा जाए और उस पर सोच विचार की जाए. तो जब सोचने की सलाहियत ही ख़त्म कर दी गई है तो आगे कैसे चलेगा? इस पे जरा थोड़ा अगर आप कुछ समझ कर सकें तो.
Came, the Sahaba were of all ages. Hazrat Abu Bakr was quite old when he was first exposed to the message of Islam. So this is like a water of life, the message. It can be, because it's built into us automatically. So nobody can really destroy our ability to think, and nobody can destroy our ability to feel. And so even Fir'aun, on his last breath, there was the option for him to accept an Islam. And so options exist for everyone. Yani Musa alayhi salam was told that when you go and talk to him, talk tenderly. He might accept the guidance. So the possibility of finding guidance. There's a famous hadith that the person had killed 99 people and 100 people, and still he had the option to repent and come back. So the doors are always open.